Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smart, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smart has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be relent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a microlender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
Well, welcome everyone. Today my guest is Bob DePasquale, a professional speaker and the founder and president of Initiate Impact, a wealth management firm focused on generosity. How are you, Bob?
Gerald, I am awesome. It has been what I would call a generous day.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Bob, tell me, how did you get started in this whole philanthropic generosity space, and what's made you successful so far in your career?
Well, the simple answer to that, what made me successful, is being a more giving person. I wasn't always a giving person. Now, I don't know how much time we have, but I can tell you the story that enlightened me about generosity if you want to hear it.
I'm sure our listeners really would want to hear that. And I want to hear it. So lay it on us.
Awesome. It starts off with a question.
Okay.
So the first thing is, did you feel that when you were 18 years old, you were invincible?
Of course. Everybody does.
Right? Doesn't everyone? But a couple people, there's always some naysayers. Bob, you're nuts. I'm speaking to crowds, and someone always raises their hand and says, "Oh, me. I always knew that I was going to destruct when I was 25." Well, let's be honest. Most of us don't realize our mortality, or at least that we're not as invincible as we think we are when we're 18. And that was me. I was an 18-year-old kid, healthy, young person, athlete, going off to college. I was going off to college for 3 reasons. One was to play football. One was to spend more time with my family that was from New York that I moved away from when I was just 3 years old.
Okay.
And then the third was to get an education.
Okay.
And my parents probably wish that education was higher on that list.
Yes.
But if I'm being honest, that was somewhere down on the bottom there. But either way, I went up to school to Hofstra University in Long Island, New York.
Okay.
Now, I had to go early because I was playing football. So, if anyone's ever been in a football training camp, even if it's in high school, it can be a pretty challenging thing, especially 20 years ago when they didn't have as many rules. I mean, we practiced 3 times a day.
Right.
Well, in college, it's a whole nother animal. Right now, we're there for a whole month before the school year even starts. There's maybe some soccer athletes on there, maybe a couple other athletes, but for the most part, we're the only people there.
Okay.
It's kind of like a month-long orientation.
Gotcha.
So, I'm in training camp trying to prove myself to my new coaches and my new teammates. I'm this confident 18-year-old, but you're also a freshman, right? So you're trying to prove yourself. And I developed what I thought was a groin injury. Okay. Now, that was the first step of me realizing my lack of invincibility or my my weakness. Now, I don't know if you ever pulled a groin muscle, but this is the second question of my story. But have you ever pulled a groin muscle?
I don't think I have, but I can imagine it being very painful.
Yes. It's painful. You can't sit. You can't stand, twist. You'd be surprised how much you use a groin muscle. So I had this pulled groin muscle for a couple of days. It wasn't getting any better. I started doing these rehab exercises. And now a college training staff's a little bit more sophisticated than a high school one.
Yeah.
But my sophisticated collegiate inspired, my trainers and doctors in college said, this is the rehab exercises that you have to do. I would sit on a 3-wheeled stool and shimmy myself across the training room. Now, the training room's, 100 feet long. There's 100 people almost on there given training camp morning at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. It's crazy. There's noise. So part of the exercise was actually just dodging the people, and I guess it was supposed to strengthen the muscles, around my hips and my groin area, I guess.
Yeah.
And it wasn't getting any better. So one day the head trainer stands on, and he was a small guy, and he would have to stand on this box in the middle of the training room to get people's attention, and he cupped his hands one day and he screamed. He's like, Bobby, they called me Bobby at the time. Like, Bobby, quit being a weakling. You need to get back out on the field. And wow, what a shot to my 18-year-old ego.
Oh yeah, he
told
called you
me
out.
that I was a weakling in front of all my teammates, everyone in the training room at that time. So needless to say, I came over to him. I said, listen, Rick, I hobbled over to the guy. I'm like, listen, this thing's not getting any better. I mean, no offense, but this exercise is terrible. I need something else. And he's like, well, I'm going to actually send you to a doctor. We had a more private meeting, and, he'd send me to a doctor. So I go to the doctor, and for a series of about, a week or so, like 7 days, about 5 to 7 days, I'm driving all over. Now, I'm technically an adult because I'm 18. So I'm going to these doctor's appointments by myself, filling out medical insurance information that's way over my head, answering questions about my medical history. No idea. I would be filling out paperwork, it seemed like, for an hour. Then I would go into these appointments, and they would run me through every test in the book. CAT scan, sonogram, MRI, you name it, every type of thing that you could think, ultrasounds, to try to figure out what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I got used to these appointments taking me about 3 hours, if not more, by the time I got out. Now, I had one more appointment on one day. Now, this was a Thursday. My parents were coming up for my first ever college game. Okay. Now, we knew that I wasn't playing in the game, which would have been a couple days later on Saturday, but they were still going to come up. I hadn't seen them in forever, and they knew something wasn't right.
Right.
So I go to this appointment expecting to be there for about 3 hours. My parents were flying up to New York that morning, and I go into the appointment expecting to be there for a long period of time. The moment I walked in the door, I check in. I said hi to the lady, and she sent me right in. She's like, they called me right into the back. I sit down in this little office room, examination room. The doctor comes in like 30 seconds later. He sits down. He looks me dead in the eye, and he says, Bobby, you have cancer. And I said,
smokes.
I mean, my jaw hit the desk, Gerald. I was like, what? I mean, I'm an invincible 18-year-old. I didn't even know what to say. And the only thing I remember him saying is, don't panic. We'll figure out what to do. We're going to hook you up with an oncologist. You're free to go. And I was like, the thought in my mind was, I don't even know what an oncologist is. Like, what does that even mean? And I walked out of there like totally flabbergasted. And I kid you not, the moment I walked out of that building, my phone rings. I mean, the timing was incredible. My mom is on the other end of the phone. I said, hey, Mom. And she's like, hey, we just landed. I wasn't expecting to catch you. I was just going to leave a voicemail, let you know we're here. We're headed back to your uncle's house, which is where we were all going to meet. Right. My parents were going to stay at my mom's brother's house. And she goes, how'd the appointment go? And I was like, about that, Mom. And, Gerald, I could just, like, she said nothing, but she was screaming all at the same time. I could just feel the panic.
Yeah.
And the only thing I could hear was my dad he must have been in his car next to her. And he, in the background, he was like, Susan, what's wrong? And my mom's name is Susan. And you could tell that even my dad knew something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And so we met back at my uncle's house not too long after that. And I hadn't seen my parents in a month. I had never been away from home that long. And I gave him a big hug, and we shed some tears. We said some prayers, and we kind of looked at each other like, what's going on? And so, I mean, I don't even really remember. The next couple of days were a blur. Saturday comes, which was the day that was supposed to be my first game. Obviously, we knew I wasn't playing.
Right.
And my uncle's best friend comes over his house. His name was Tim. We didn't know the guy because we lived in Florida, where I live now, and we were up in New York, and we never met Tim before. But he comes into the house, says hi to my aunt and uncle, and introduces himself to my parents, and says Bob and Susan, and reaches into his pocket and pulls out his keys, and he hands his keys to my parents and says, "I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now. Take my car. You can have it and use it for as long as you possibly need it to take your son wherever you need to go." And my parents were like, "What?" I mean, they were totally blown away. And I thought to myself, wow, that's the most generous thing that someone's ever done for my family.
Yeah.
We didn't even know. Give us his car. And he said, he didn't say much else. My parents were so thankful. He was there for a couple more minutes. He said goodbye to my aunt and uncle, and he left. And that was it. He was there, I mean, maybe 15 minutes. He was at my uncle's house. And we're like, wow, that's crazy. And my aunt and uncle were like, yeah, that's Tim. That's just the type of guy he is. So a couple of days went by, and I went to my first ever college class on Monday morning, thanks to Tim's car. Second day, went to my second ever college class. And I came out of the class, and I was hungry. And so I went to the cafeteria, not pretty near the hall where my class was, and I grabbed, I think I had a breakfast burrito. Now, do you remember those televisions? Not like this one behind me, a flat screen, but like an old school tube television.
Of course.
It might have been 8 inches. I mean, not a big
one. You
one.
can see from the gray hair, I would remember that.
Yeah. So you're familiar. But if anyone else can picture about an 8-inch tube television hanging from a bracket in the corner of the ceiling in the wall.
Yes.
In a public cafeteria, right? Yeah. And I'm eating my breakfast burrito and the news is on. Now, I don't know the news station. I mean, once again, I'm 18 years old. I don't even watch the news, no less know what to put on in New York. But that's what's on TV. And I'm watching it while I'm eating. And all of a sudden, I see a plane hit one of the towers in New York City. And I was like, what? I mean, what a horrible accident. So I called my dad. I said, hey, you watching the news? Did you see this plane just hit it? He's like, yeah, man, that's terrible. I mean, I wonder what happened. And we're talking for like a minute or so. And all of a sudden, bam, a second plane hits the other twin tower in the World Trade Center in downtown Manhattan. And my dad's like, that's not an accident. You better get in the car and get back to your uncle's house. So this was the September 11th terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center. And so I hopped in the car. I mean, I ran out of that cafeteria. I would imagine the breakfast burrito is still sitting there on the counter. And I hopped in the car. Now, subsequently, obviously, I'm okay. I'm healthy. I studied broadcast journalism. I have a master's degree from the University of Miami.
Okay.
But it took me 9 hours to make what was typically a 15-minute drive from my school to my uncle's house.
Yeah.
I've worked in radio using my journalism degree, but I will never, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio ever again. But I listened to the whole thing. 9 straight hours of AM radio. Not 1 minute did I zone out. I mean, I'm inching down the highway, burning towers way in the distance because I'm in New York.
Yeah. And
people are panicking. I mean, it was just chaos. I pulled into my uncle's neighborhood actually.
Yeah.
And I ran out of gas. Thank God I ran out of gas in my uncle's neighborhood and not on the highway. Yeah. But we had to push my car into the driveway. And we pushed it in. I got out of the car and I'm looking like my parents, like we're all sitting there like, what's going on? Like a week ago I was invincible. Now I thought my life might be coming to an end.
Yeah.
But now I think the world might be coming to an end. Like, what is going on? This is crazy. My aunt was absolutely beside herself because my uncle was on business the night before in Denver and we couldn't get a hold of him. And he was supposed to fly to New York in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Now about 8 o'clock or so at night, finally the phone rings and it's him. And we're like, oh, thank God he's okay. Now, we didn't know at this point where the planes had come from. Like, He easily could have been a plane from Denver.
Exactly.
And he's like, I'm okay. I'm sorry, guys. I've tried to call you all day long, but the phones have been out. I'm sure you've been panicking. I'm okay. I'm sitting here in the hotel. I don't know what's happening, but I'm okay. And I haven't got much information. So we were going to hang up the phone, like in this big relief. But he goes, but quickly, before I let you go, I need to tell you that my best friend, Tim, who you all just met, was in the towers this morning and he died.
Oh, wow.
And we all looked at each other like, Tim, like the guy who just did that really generous thing for us,
Right.
he didn't deserve to die. Like what a horrible story. And so it turns out, Gerald, that Tim worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. Now, if you look up the story of Cantor Fitzgerald, they lost everyone except for their CEO that day, who was uncharacteristically not in the office at that time in the morning, taking his son to school. And you watch the press conference. I mean, it still gets me choked up to this day. But Cantor Fitzgerald and Tim were known for being a generous organization, having a generous culture.
Yeah.
They even donated office space to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis, a disease that my cousin has. So there was just a generous culture around there.
Yeah.
And Tim was known for saying stuff like, well, actually, before I even tell you what Tim said, you've heard the term FOMO before?
Yeah.
Fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about this. We throw that around, or YOLO, you only live once. And sure, I get it. Those things make sense to me. I mean, we should chase after the things that are important to us. But Tim put a different twist on it. He would say, you only live once, or you may only have one. You never know when your last opportunity to be generous to someone will be. And come to find out, my family were the direct beneficiaries of Tim's last opportunity to be generous.
Mm.
And so you asked the question about, my story and why generosity is important to me, and why, what I learned about this. I learned that lesson from Tim, and that office space that they would donate to my uncle's foundation wasn't typically filled with anyone at that time in the morning, because the foundation staff would get there a little bit later.
Yeah.
The only lady or only person who would typically be there, her name was Tammy. She was also uncharacteristically late that morning, and she got stuck in the subway below the towers. And she's alive to this day and can tell the stories, and the stories that she can tell are amazing. But you never know. For whatever reason, Tammy was meant to be spared that day.
Yeah.
And Howard Lukin, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, was, but Tim and his other colleagues were not. And so I've always lived my life since that day in a way to try to be more generous. Now, it's taken a long time to work through that. It wasn't like that day I suddenly became the most giving person in the world. It's taken years. But that day is what has shaped my life and shaped my perspective around being a giving person.
Wow, what a story. What an amazing story. And now you left the open loop there. What happened with you with the cancer? Obviously you're here, you're doing better, but how did that go?
So I would never wish chemotherapy and the surgeries and the other drugs and needles that I had to give myself on anyone.
Yeah.
And people ask me, would you change it? Absolutely. I would change that. I would not want to ever go through that again. I mean, I lost my hair, did all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I had a very, very intense chemo schedule. I didn't have radiation. It as you might have made the leap, maybe not. The groin injury ended up being testicular cancer.
Yeah.
But because it had spread up into my abdomen, it had caused other issues. And so my chemo, thankfully I was a healthy, young person otherwise, somewhat invincible, maybe not quite as I believed, but that enabled my oncologist to really hit me pretty hard with the chemo. It was for about 4 months, it was a really rough time. I ended up, the chemo ended up working about as good as it possibly could. And I had to go back and for 10 years, I was getting tested and they were watching me closely. And I have some other side effects that I really can't complain. I'm blessed to be alive. So I'm okay. It took me about, like I said, the treatments took about 4 months. It took another year. That was the physical aspect of it. I got back into the sports field, and in about a year, I had gotten over kind of the mental. It took me a while to go through the mental aspects of it all. Yeah. And then emotionally, though, it took about a couple of years to truly recover. I didn't even realize it, but there were some dark nights, even a year later, that I had to work through. So to answer your question, I'm fully healthy. She was not my wife at the time. I didn't even know her. I have another story about that too. But ultimately, after we had been married for a few years, let's see, we were married for about 4 years at that point, I think. My wife finally got to meet my oncologist, and in that meeting, he finally looked at me for the first time in 10 years. He looked at me and said, Bobby, you're cured. And so that was a tremendous experience. Wow. So yeah, I'm doing great right now. I no complaints.
Yeah, what a story. And it's interesting. It's like it's almost like the hero's journey a little bit, right? Where you take off and you're going to conquer the mountain, and then you hit this massive chasm of tragedy and hardship. right? But it's through growing through the tragedy and growing through the hardship and I mean, you're impacted physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in every area or dimension of your life. You were taken through a chasm. You were challenged, and what I get from it, and as I'm sitting here talking with you and looking at you, is that you had to grow through. You didn't just go through the challenges or difficulties, because when you go through something like that, you can either get bitter or better, right?
Mm.
You can either get bitter or better, and it seems like you made the decision to get better, but to get better, that means you have to grow through the difficulties that you're going through, right? And really dig down deep to become this other person that was there. It's kind of like a diamond, it's diamond in the rough. It's there, but it has to be taken through the fire of life for it to really come out. And I can totally relate to that. If you've listened to my podcast, a solo podcast about my story with vertigo and the things I went through and things I still go through with the vestibular imbalance and things like that, it's changed who I am. It's made me a better person, and I've had to grow through those things. So I think a lot of people listening can relate, because there are a lot of unsung stories out there of people who've gone through really difficult situations, and they've had to grow through the challenges just to kind of make ends meet and make things work. But it's amazing because you took it and obviously built not only your life, got married, and made it a mission and a purpose. What do you think may be poorly understood about generosity and giving after you've gone through what you've gone through?
Well, there's a couple things. I have anecdotal evidence. I have scientific evidence. I've studied it a lot.
Yep.
The first and most obvious thing to me, and I feel like it's starting to come around a little bit, is that generosity is a complete self-sacrifice. There's a lot of content out there and information, a couple of great books, and even some podcasts that you can learn about how it's truly not. I think generosity is often leads to more collaboration than self-sacrifice, which is a great thing. And I believe humans have that. So that's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that and I talk about this a lot, especially with organizations, because the organizations that have the most generous culture and that believe that everyone can contribute to the cause are the ones that thrive and the ones that have radical growth themselves.
Yeah.
And so the belief, though, is out there that the self-help industry is a massive industry with books and courses and content and ebooks and blogs, you name it. There's a podcast, everything. And that it's all about how we're not good enough, that we need more. I need to be more productive. I need to sleep more so that I can have more energy. I need to eat right. Like, it's all about, we need all these life hacks because we're just not capable of doing stuff.
Right.
And this is such a misnomer in the world, Gerald. I think that each and every single one of us has a set of gifts and skills that we can use to contribute to society and make the world a better place. And we don't need all these tips and tricks and hacks and books. I had a guy by the name of Robert Riopel on my podcast, and he coined the term. I don't know if he coined the term, but he used it. He called it shelf help, because we have all these self-help books and they end up just sitting there collecting dust on our shelf.
Yeah.
And I would say, rather than go read those 5 self-help books on your shelf, I'd say go do something, go take action. Don't read those books. Maybe read them later, or read them when you truly come to a point where you're hitting your head against the wall and there's something. But the vast majority of us are in a position in the world right now, literally right now, as you're listening, as you're doing the dishes or driving in the car or on your jog right now as you listen to this, or working on your business. If you're trying to build a small business, right now you have the capability, you have the gifts and skills in one way or another to make the world a better place. And that is generosity in my mind, is using what you have to make the world a better place. And when you do that, that's where the collaboration comes in. So it's a big misnomer to me that we need more and more tips and tricks to help us get better. What we actually need is the confidence to go out there and do it.
Right, right. And I think the tips and tricks could be also seen as, developing the knowledge to understand how to even tap into what we have. right? So it's not just about tips and tricks as well, but it could be about just really digging down deep and learning who we are and what we already have to bring to the table. But I think you're right from the standpoint of we're basically born with everything that we need. We just need to know how to access it. And I think the challenges that life sends us through on each of our journeys that we go through is it's life's way, or the Creator's way of saying, let me show you who you are, right? Mm-hmm. Because you don't really know who you are until you go through the fire of life and get challenged, and then you have to step up to the challenge and face it, whether it's the chemo or whether it's, I think everyone listening knows exactly where they were on 9/11. I mean, when you start talking, you mentioned 9/11, the place that I was at, the images, the smells, everything came right back to me. And so it's a way our bodies encode information and knowledge. And if we just take what we have, keep learning and growing, but also giving. And I think that's the thing that I learned, was that as I was learning and growing, if I'm giving, then I'm actually passing on energy and what I'm trying to attract in my life, because I'm also giving, that is going to be coming back to me. So how did that go with your mom and dad as far as their part of the story? Are they still enjoying, able to be around and see your life and what you've become?
I'm an only child, so that was a really, really tough thing for them. Being a spoiled, rotten only child, brat, that I was. Maybe that's a little harsh, but I was their everything, and so it was. That was a really, really tough time for the family. Thankfully, lucky enough, my other cousin, so not my cousin with cystic fibrosis, but my uncle's other child, one of her best friends' dad ended up being my oncologist, so we stayed in New York.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad would actually fly back and forth when I had chemo treatments for a week and still work. Thankfully, the job would give him some time off to come when I was actually getting treated. And then my mom did work for one of her best friends, so they allowed her to. I mean, it really wasn't a remote work environment that long ago. It was more of you just take as much time as you need and we'll fill in for you.
Yeah.
So it was a strain, though, because my parents had to spend time apart. And then obviously they didn't know how I was doing, and they're dealing with all the insurance and the financial part of it all.
Yeah.
I have a somewhat comical story about my fertility. So they were worried about that, and if they were ever going to have grandkids someday. So it was just a very, very stressful time for them. I mean, they're both alive now and loving parents. I have a great relationship with both of them, but that was a straining time on the family. Subsequently, my parents ultimately did end up getting divorced. Now they're cordial, and but that had something to do with it.
That can all those different challenges can really weigh in on things. And so now I want to hear more about that, and also about what your future goals are. But before we do that and dive deeper into our conversation, I want to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors and a fantastic book called A Symphony of Choices.
Introducing A Symphony of Choices, the must-read book for any manager looking to improve their decision-making, project management, and workplace engagement skills. Author Gerald J. Leonard takes readers on a journey through a high-pressure season for a symphony orchestra, where a mentorship program was implemented to turn things around. Through real-life examples and relatable anecdotes, you'll learn how mentorship can transform a team, boost productivity, and achieve outstanding results. This book is not just for music industry professionals, but for anyone in a leadership position who wants to improve their management skills. With practical tips and actionable advice, you'll discover how to make sound decisions in high-pressure situations, motivate your team to achieve their best work, manage complex projects with ease, foster a culture of collaboration and teamwork, and much more. A Symphony of Choices is a timely resource full of practical tools and real examples that will help you build the knowledge and skills to thrive in a project-driven world. Antonio Nieto Rodriguez. A Symphony of Choices is a book that will inspire and empower you to become a better leader, Whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out in your career, this book is an invaluable resource for anyone looking to improve their management skills and achieve success in the workplace. Order your copy today and join the thousands of managers who have already benefited from the mentorship lessons presented in A Symphony of Choices.
Welcome back. So tell me a little bit more about that story, and also maybe prep up to a part of one of the questions I have for you is, if you're sitting here a year from now of our conversation in 2024 and you're accomplishing some major goals, or you're doing some major generosity things, the things that you're doing, what's life going to look like for you? What's on your plate?
So I'll continue the story. I mentioned I was healthy. I went back to college and school and playing ball, and life was pretty good. Although I did have some of those moments that I mentioned about that were really tough. But once I went, I was a junior, and a couple of years later, and I kind of worked through some of the emotional things. I started thinking about more how I could use that period of time in my life for good. My parents always raised me to be a man of integrity.
Yep.
And it was a little bit of a struggle for me to figure out, okay, is this a story, or this is something that people want to hear? And I got some feedback from some people, and I realized there could be something I could use it for, but I didn't know what. And then after graduate school, I worked in radio for a short period of time, and I ended up getting recruited out of radio. It's kind of a funny story about how the recruiter went to the school where my wife, who's a kindergarten teacher, works at.
Okay.
But I'll spare you that story to continue on my own. Essentially, that guy completely forgot about me, and I ended up calling him back because that's what I used, the words I used to get him off the phone. And my parents told me to be a man of my word as well. I told you about the integrity. Yeah. So I ended up calling him back. I had a couple of days off, which was rare in the radio business, and I knew that there was a couple things at the radio conglomerate that I worked for that I thought just were a little questionable from a moral perspective, and how they were treating some of their customers and the money. And so the guy it caught me at the right time. And I said, well, you know what? If I believe there's problems in the financial aspect of running a radio business, I can't imagine what they're like in the actual financial business. So this guy recruited me into finance. And I thought I was going to go into the belly of the beast. I was like, all right, I'm going right into it, and I'm going to get a bunch of fraudulent, jerky people, and I'm going to turn this industry around. I'm going to make people think a little bit more kindly with the resources that they have.
Okay.
And so my mind was, I'm going to help them be more generous.
Right.
Well, I ended up getting hired by the recruiter for a tremendous company. My business partner and I since left there a couple of years ago to start our own firm. We can talk more about that later. But essentially, I thought I was going to the belly of the beast. What I found out, though, Gerald, was fascinating to me. And this relates to what I was talking about a moment ago.
Okay.
The overwhelming amount of families and people and businesses that I consulted and worked with over my 12 or so years in that role were very giving, generous people. And I believe generosity and giving, and specifically compassion, is inherent in humans.
Yeah. And
there's scientific data on this. One of the greatest things that I like to think about is humans out of all animals have one of the longest child rearing periods. I mean, it's in most places it's 18 years that we are there for our kids. In some cases more. Some would argue it's too long. In some cases, with a parent living with your parents until you're 25. But my point is, we really care about people inherently.
Yeah.
And some of those messages in the world start telling us that we shouldn't do that. We need to focus more on improving ourselves. And I do know that if you're in an airplane and it's going down, you should put your mask on yourself first.
Right.
So don't take this as complete self-sacrifice and martyrdom, and don't take care of yourself. What it means, though, is use the things that you're good at to help others. And so I tell you that because I thought I needed to show people how to be generous. That wasn't the case at all. What I needed to show them was that they are capable of being generous. The amount of excuses that they manifested in their mind, and I'm not just talking about money. Yes, I was working with money and helping people make wise decisions with their financials, but it was more than that. It was that I don't have enough time. Right. No one really cares who I am. I don't have any influence. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough money. I got to take care of these other things. And there was so many different reasons that they had in their mind that they were incapable of being a giving person. And I just realized, and it took me a while to realize it, but towards the back half of my career there, I realized that it just wasn't true. And I realized that what was going to be most fulfilling for me, or the way that I was going to use my story to help, was I was going to convince people that you never know. As Tim said, you never know when your last chance to be generous to someone is. So don't ever give an excuse. And that's my mission.
Gotcha. So as far as your as far as role models for yourself, who have been some of your role models that you've been mimicking or looking at to kind of learn a lot of what you've learned? Because success leaves clues. When we follow people who are successful, we figure out what are the things that they are doing, or who coached them, or what books did they read. Who are some of your role models that help you to grow in your mindset of being generous?
Great one. Well, I mean, I didn't know Tim very long, but some of the things that I've heard about him, I've had an opportunity to speak with his family, so he's a good one.
Okay.
My uncle himself is a great example because he's also a very giving person with his foundation. So I've always admired the amount of time and effort he's put into a nonprofit organization specifically to help thousands upon thousands, if not more, people that suffer from a disease. My dad is also a great one. What I always appreciate about my dad was he's never a wealthy person, never financially wealthy, but he was always wealthy in spirit and relationships. And when my dad, towards the end of his career, working for supermarkets, my parents actually met in the supermarket, but we had a 50th birthday party for my dad when I was, that must have been shortly before. Actually, I was probably in high school, so it was shortly before that.
Okay.
That this whole thing happened. But I'll never forget this, Gerald. The amount of people that came to that party that I had no idea who they were, and that came up to me and said, I loved either working for your dad, working with my dad, or having your dad work for me. And none of it was about, oh, he was the greatest end cap setter at the supermarket, or he did a great job of making sure that we never ran out of, whatever, canned goods, or groceries, whatever it was, produce. It was always, he always asked how I was doing, or he always made the customer feel comfortable. He knew everyone by name. He addressed people by their name. It was always the way he developed relationships. He was so generous with his time. And I remember seeing, I would, take your kid to work day, or every once in a while I was in the store where he was working.
Yeah.
And even when he never made it, he was never the CEO or anything, but he ended up like maybe managing a store or a portion of the store. And he would be on his hands and knees or walking through the aisles, and he would just be tilting the labels, or the bottle of whatever it was, so it looked really, really good. And his attention to detail was amazing, and he applied that to his relationship. So so my dad would be the third person I would say that was such an inspiring mentor. And then one other person I'll put out there is my wife. And the reason for that is, and this is not just to score points with my wife. She's probably gonna laugh at me when I even say this. But my wife's a kindergarten teacher, and this is not a profession where we give enough credit to.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think teachers are, underpaid, which would help me, but if they were paid more. But I mean, underappreciated, B, underappreciated, and then C, we don't really give them enough credit of the intelligence and the mental capacity, like the ability it takes to teach young people.
Yeah.
And so I say that because her level of patience is the most admirable characteristic that I think I've ever found in someone. And there's a reason why she married me, because I'm a crazy person. So you have to be patient. We joke about this all the time, but I'd say I definitely admire that. And I don't know if she would and I don't know if I'd call her a mentor, but I've absolutely learned over the past 16 years of how to be more patient with people. And that, believe it or not, is one of the most generous things that you can do for people. Is if you can just be patient with their thoughts and ideas.
Oh, yeah.
And let them express themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Listening is a gift that we give to somebody who's sharing their story. When we spend time and look at them in the eye and listen to them and listen to their story, it's a gift. But those are some great mentors, and it sounds like the people in your life have really left a hallmark, imprint on you and helped you become the person that you've become. Now, when you think about your life, what would you consider an aha moment? Obviously, you've had a number of them that we've just talked about, but is there any other moment that we haven't talked about that would be considered an aha moment in your life that was like, wow, that's what I need? Okay, that happened, and wow, that really made me think and stop and pivot and maybe change directions or just even tweak some of the things that you may be doing.
Well, I alluded to it earlier, but I have to tell you the story, and it's
Okay.
back. It's about my wife again.
Love
I
stories.
mean, this was the most aha moment, I mean, ever. And I don't think there'll ever be one in my life. Maybe that'll change. So my wife and I, we actually met on a mission trip, and a group of us became really, really good friends. And we were not dating each other. It wasn't, a serious relationship by any means. It was serious from a friendship perspective, but we all supported each other. And we would spend lots of time talking to each other. And one night we were talking, and we're long distance now, right? So like we're on the phone, but it's not like we see each other. Like we're talking with our friends all over the country. And cell phone minutes, it had to be after 9 o'clock, and you could talk for free. I don't know if you remember that. That's not as old as tube televisions, but that's still a ways back. And we would one night, it must have been after midnight. It was late, and it was just the two of us talking. I don't remember what we were talking. We were reminiscing about something, and we were like, "Hey, tell me a little bit more about school or high school. What was life like?" We didn't even know those little things about each other.
Right.
And so she was telling me this story about one of her teachers in high school, and his name was Mr. Zill. And the first day of class, he comes into the class, and he's welcoming everyone. And he's giving an agenda and telling all about it. He says, one of the things that we're going to do this year, class, is we're all going periodically during the semester, we're going to pray for our future spouses. And the kids are like, what? Like, I'm 16 years old. Like, I'm not thinking about my future spouse. I can't even put my clothes on, no less praying for them. So whatever. I mean, they went throughout the semester, and you just kind of, you do as you're told, I guess. And periodically they would take a little bit of time, and they would, most kids were probably daydreaming, but my wife said, yeah. So I thought to myself, whatever I could, good thoughts, and I'd pray for you, or I'd pray for somebody. No idea who it would be. Well, we were doing the math and trying to figure out, and I started talking about my college experience, and I was telling her, after high school, I was healthy, and I was telling her all the story, and she's a couple grades behind me. And we figured out that when she was in Mr. Zill's class as a junior in high school, I was a freshman in college going through my cancer treatments and all of that.
Okay.
And when she said that, and we both got dead silent at the same time, it was like, oh, what an amazing moment. I couldn't believe it. So that whole time that I was struggling with what I was struggling, she wasn't going to meet me for another 5 or 6 years or whatever it was. And she had been lifting me up that whole time. And so I mean, that moment, I remember that's very similar to what you talked about, the 9/11. I remember where I was sitting or laying or whatever I was doing. I remember what it smelled like. I remember the room I was in. And we came to that realization. So that was a really, really powerful moment in my life that I'll never forget.
Wow. That's pretty special. That's pretty special. Now, before we move on, we have to take another quick break, and then I have some other questions before we wrap things up with you here. So if you want to take your productivity to the next level and achieve even greater success, check out our sponsor, Growth Strategies.
Are you looking for a way to take your business or career to the next level? Look no further than the Growth Strategies Coaching and Mastermind Program from the Productivity Intelligence Institute. This innovative program is designed for entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals who want to accelerate their growth and achieve their goals faster than they ever thought possible. Led by productivity expert and mastermind coach Gerald J. Leonard, this program offers a unique blend of coaching, mentorship, and peer support. Through weekly coaching calls, personalized feedback, and accountability from a supportive community of like-minded professionals, you'll learn the strategies and tactics you need to achieve your most ambitious goals. Whether you're looking to increase revenue, build your team, or launch a new product or service, the Growth Strategies Coaching and Mastermind Program can help you get there. Ready to take your business or career to the next level? Sign up for the Growth Strategies Coaching and Mastermind Program today at productivityintelligenceinstitute.com/mastermind.
Welcome back. Now, Bob, what challenges have you been able to help some of your customers with lately?
Well, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. It's making them realize that they have incredible power and ability to
Okay.
make the world a better place and do something. And so when we're working with, I have two sides to my business. Essentially, one of them is working with organizations. I mean, I do keynote addresses and I speak with them and I help them and train them on how to build a generous culture. And then my financial firm is a wealth management firm focused on generosity. And we always get in conversations about how can we use our resources for good.
Right.
And so whether that's financial resources of a generous family, or it's the manpower and resources and financial resources, intellectual property of an organization. And so one of the things that I help them overcome is the limiting beliefs that they're going to fall behind in their life as the family in keeping up with the Joneses, or they're going to fall behind their competitors if it's a business, and by using what they have for something else, because it always comes back around them. So we build out a plan that determines what they're best at and how to use it to support other people and how to build collaborative relationships. And you'd be surprised on some of the ways that individuals and organizations can come together to do great things.
Yeah.
And it's contagious. I have the scientific evidence that it's contagious, and I've also seen it multiple times over where organizations that partner and collaborate well, they attract the most loyal customers, they attract the best talent, and it's reciprocal. It's kind of a flywheel, you spin it. It's kind of hard to get it spinning, but once you get it going, it's easier with each rotation.
Exactly. Now, do you talk about that? Because I'm looking at over your shoulder and I see your book. Do you talk about that inside your book?
In the book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to financial giving, and I also have a chapter dedicated to the psychology behind collaboration. So yes, it's not the only chapters, but those are in there.
Yeah. Now, do you have a framework around some of the things that you teach in your book?
The book, so the book itself is a framework.
Okay.
What the book does.
Okay.
The book is for anyone that feels a little bit overwhelmed or feel like technology is a bad influence on themselves or their family or their organization.
Right.
And it takes each chapter in the middle section of the book is dedicated to a different subject related to personal finance.
Okay.
Or corporate or even corporate finance you could apply it to. And so what it does though is it debunks the myth that technology is something that we should be afraid of or something that has to be bad. Yeah. Now, it'll tell you that it is very bad in certain cases, and there's the evidence in the early chapters on why it's bad or why it's being considered bad. But each chapter takes technology and applies it to that specific area and tells you how to use it for good and provides that framework. So you can read through the book from cover to cover and get some great insight, but then it's also designed for you to go back to a section when you need it. So like if you say, you know what, I got to make a big decision about my retirement, I'm going to jump back to that chapter when I need to, or insurance or philanthropy, as we've talked a lot about today.
Yep.
And you can go back to it. So I don't know if you call that a framework, but it's a nice little encyclopedia.
Yeah, no, that's good. So it's like each chapter can stand independently on its own, or you get it, but you can also get a good overview of the entire book by reading it, from front to back and, like you said, cover to cover. But then you can go back and reference the different sections based on what you're dealing with personally. That's awesome. That's excellent. Where can people find your book?
If you go to bobdepasquale.com, you can get all the information you need about the book, and it's also on all major platforms. It's hardcover, softcover, audio book. There's an ebook version. You can get it all. Amazon is probably the easiest for most people.
Okay. Okay.
But if you go to your Barnes and Noble, and you might find it in there.
Excellent. Well, that's tremendous. Is there anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
I don't know. What's my favorite food? I don't know. No, there's nothing. You asked some great questions. Very, very insightful. I really hope that people, believe in their capability of doing something great, because I think we all have it in us. And you kind of said it really good earlier about how it's there. We just got to figure out how to tap into it.
Yeah, and quite honestly, that's why I named the podcast Productivity Smarts, because we already are productivity smart. We just need to understand what's there already. And a lot of times it's not that we have to, we may reach out and grab a book to get some additional insights, but what we're really doing is the book is shining a light on what we already have inside of us. And then, we discover that, oh, wow, I didn't know that I had that capability or that thought. Again, like going through a hardship, like for yourself with the cancer or myself with the vestibular, major bout with vertigo and the vestibular issue, it forces us to dig deeper into our own personal characters than we knew what was there. And it really helps us to pull out what's already inside of us. And all of us have that. Every last one of us have that capability. Bob, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope people will go out and check out your book and check out your website. And where can they find you again?
Bob DePasquale, and I'm on all platforms at BDEPA. So if you're on Instagram, Twitter, you can find it all on the website. That's the best place to go.
Excellent. Well, I'll put all the links in the show note as well and point them to your website. Really great having you on. Maybe in another year we'll have you come back and you can tell us how, what's happened in the next year of your life with your journey. And so thanks so much for coming on to Productivity Smarts. And I'm really happy we got a chance to have this conversation.
You're welcome. All the best, man. I love the show.
Excellent. Thank you. If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.